if you understand that what you do gives you value, it feeds your soul. That in itself is part of what we're striving for. I think many parents would rather their kids be happy than wealthy, right? So long as they know that their child is secure in that conversation with themselves.
Right. Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I'm your host, Brittney-Nichole. In the previous episode, episode 90 of the traditional format of this podcast, the interview side of the podcast, we interviewed Karena de Souza. That was episode 90. Karena shared her journey of traveling the world with her family, which included her husband and 3 young children, and how her background in strategy and forecasting played a major role in this decision and how they fared along the way. That conversation also led us to what Karena does around the future of work and how things are changing for Generation Z. So if you missed that conversation, feel free to take a listen either before or after this episode. Either one is totally fine, but I would highly recommend to listen. Karena is a fabulous storyteller. So that is episode 90. All right, so let me give you a quick recap of who Karena is. So Karena de Souza is the founder of Tilt the Future, a future of work resource for parents and Gen Z. She is also the author of Contours of Courageous Parenting. She has a podcast called Tilt the Future, which focuses on the future of work. And if you're new to this podcast, or maybe you've been listening for a while, and you're wondering, so how does this tie into emotional intelligence? And that's a great question. Well, when you are choosing a career path or any decision in life, we try to be logical, right? But emotions are involved always in when we make decisions. And so emotional intelligence helps us to be aware of those emotions that may get in our way. For example, fear. In relation to the future of work, we could have the fear of choosing the wrong field of work, of not being seen as an asset, whether the job that we're choosing or the career field we're going into will be around 10, 20, 30 years from now. So there's a lot of big decisions being made, which is why emotional intelligence is crucial during this time. And Karena talks a lot about parents making decisions for their kids going into the future because parents want the best for their children, right? But how can that maybe hinder their child's own decision-making and growth and choosing the field that works for them? So while we want to be logical and diligent, we also don't want to become numb to our passions or numb the passions or push back or push aside the passions of our children due to fear and fear alone. And so Karena will talk more about these important decisions and how we make those decisions and how emotional intelligence plays an important role in our career path and decisions in the second half of our interview together today. So without further ado, here's the second half of the conversation with Karena de Souza. Karena, welcome back to the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. So as we were discussing right before the recording, I realized that where we left off wasn't very clear. I was kind of like, we could talk about this, or we could talk about that, or we could pick up where we left off there. And so for you listening or viewing, it may seem very clear where we left off because you may be listening to these back to back. So a few things that we talked about was gig work and how that's really changing how we view education and work in general. And then we were talking about parenting along with that because several reasons. One, a lot of parents still have that mindset of you have to go to an institution, you have to continue your education if you want a good job. But so many people are going the entrepreneurial route or the gig route now and what that looks like. And I think in regards to emotional intelligence, it's kind of on both sides because parents need to be able to be understanding that times are changing and success looks different now. And for the younger generations, they also need to realize that, yes, while you don't need to get that 4-year degree or that master's or that doctorate, that doesn't mean that that transition period is going to be easy. There's a lot of hard work when it comes to having your own business or even being a gig worker.
Right.
Because you're still being a jack of all trades.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back.
Oh, yeah,
and,
sorry.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Yes, you rightly point out that a lot of my focus over the past couple of years has been on the future of work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like I may have mentioned in the previous part when we were speaking, I came to it. My specialty is strategy. And at the time, I happened to also be looking after my kid, or, also coaching my kids on what careers they should have. So we're talking about 2014, 2015 here.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like so far away, but if I look back, it was such a clear transition. And we cannot believe how much we know now that we did not know in 2015. So I just want, bear that in mind. Bear that in mind that at that point, the only way forward was the way we then knew, which was the 4-year degree.
Right.
And so what I was recommending was quite against against our instincts, but I could see where this was beginning to unroll, where we were beginning to focus on gig work. And there was a whole bunch of indicators coming out of the 2008 crisis that caused it to be that way. So it's all history. And if you want more information, either contact me directly or we can do another session. But what has happened over the past 10 years is that organizations have come to see that they are more nimble, they are more responsive if they bring in the talent they want when they need it. So an organization like Apple won't invest in having full-time janitorial staff because they can buy that in. Where they focus their energy is on the people who design, the people who are creating the products themselves, right? Similarly, IBM outsourced their data center. So it's like, when you realize that organizations are outsourcing components of what we thought they were about, you begin to see where they're actually focusing their energies. So this is a little bit of a backdrop to say, why is this gig transition happening nowadays? It's happening because, as I said, an organization can be more nimble and therefore more profitable. It's no wonder that the stock market has taken off in the past 10 years. The reason that organizations have positioned themselves this way is that they focus on their core competency. When you don't have to pay the mailroom staff vacation and pension plans and healthcare, you can actually pound that money back into your core competency, your core energy, your R&D. That's what has happened. That's what has actually triggered that uphill volume and energy in the stock market. But the negative part of it for the rest of us is we don't have those natural transition points, that natural way of growing into our careers. So it brings to mind a whole different mentality, a whole different way of working. And that's why we call it the future of work, or now I'm beginning to call it the nature of work, the shape of work, other ways of referring to it. So if I look at my kids, and I'll use my kids as proxy for everybody else's, I imagine a world where if they are not already if they're not fully employed, they're more likely to be gig workers. So they're going to be on contract, they're going to be on long-term contracts, sometimes short-term contracts. So if you take someone who develops websites, they go out there and they get their own, they're marketing for themselves. So one of the messages I've been giving over the past 5 years to young people is you have to be able to look at yourself as your own corporation. It's me, Inc. All right. Like you right now, you're marketing yourself. You have to have that mentality that somebody else is not doing it for you. Right. They're not managing your career. They're not managing your education. They're not managing your professional development.
Or retirement.
And they're not managing your marketing. They're not getting you your next job. So it changed the way we use phrases like networking, the way we use like things like LinkedIn, because if you've got to move away from thinking, oh, I only use that to get a job, right? Marketing is now just basically going out there, talking to people, being interested in what they do, sharing your knowledge in a way that makes you more enticing to them when they need help.
Yeah, building
right?
those relationships.
Yes. So this filters back into parenting. This filters back into the EQ skills, because all those components were what were normally kind of put in that bucket of soft skills, the word that I hate, soft. No, they're core skills. They are human skills. They are scaffolding. They're the things. Yep, they're the things that are the core of us. I used to call them just so you do your core exercises and you stabilize. That is what these are. And so it's very important for parents to understand this transition, because a parent as old as I am could trust that the HR department would watch for my career development. They would say, oh, you want to be better at this here. I'll talk to such and such a manager and put you in that role. That is no longer the role of an HR department now. An HR department will actually focus on what the corporation needs. If they want you to be in Asia, they will get you moved to Asia. If they want you in, South Africa, they'll move you to South Africa. It's not necessarily, you are very lucky if your requirements are part of what will factor into where you're going next if you're part of a large corporation. The other stat that's really interesting is that by 2030, and this was pre-COVID stats, so I wouldn't be surprised if it accelerates. By 2030, 80% of the North American workforce would be gig work. And that is scary. So when I came across this research, I think it was 2018, at least 55% of Google and 60% of Microsoft, I believe, I think it was 45% of Google and 55% of Microsoft were contract workers.
Really?
Now,
wow.
Contract workers can be, a software developer. It could be someone in the marketing department creating their, annual report. It could be any of those. But it goes to show that if you've got corporations that right now are in the billion, $trillion range that are this staffed by contract workers, to me, that's an indicator. That's a flag that I start watching for. It's a signal. So if they are comfortable doing this, the rest of the organizations that feed them, the organizations that want to be like them, will start behaving like them. And that's why I think it is more likely than not that we're going to see more gig workers coming in. So if you're a parent, and I'm a parent, what do I want for my kids? I want them to be happy, and I want them to be well cared for. And I think I've done everything in my power by making sure that, they've got good access to a good education, et cetera, to set themselves up. And now suddenly they're in this workplace that isn't what I'd imagined it to be. This is a workplace where possibly they'll do a really great 4-month stint, and then they're looking for the next job for the next 3 months. I have to communicate to them how they feel in those 3 months. And it's better that I start that when they're young. If I tell them that their self-worth is about being employed, then when they have no choice to be in between jobs, right? I'm doing air quotes for the podcast, then they begin to feel not as worthy. And where my mind went with this is I started worrying about our mental health crisis that right now we're already seeing in COVID. So this is me in 2015 extrapolating what things were going to look like. And so my thought, I grew up in a family where you were told, get a full-time job, a job with pension plans, a job that pays your medical, then you will be set. Well, what happens if that is not so? And if I'm communicating that same message to my child and the workplace no longer supports it, I'm basically feeding them into a system where they can and they could possibly end up with a mental health crisis. So that is what I've made my mission, to talk to parents and say, this is a possibility. I'm not saying it is and is. It can always change. But for the present, it looks fairly likely that we're going to have significant components of the workforce working gig work, which means that we're going to be looking at times when they're not fully paid for their time. So I'm on a personal mission. I don't want it to be called unemployment. I want it to be called upskilling time. And that, I hope, would change the way we view it. So if you're in your upskilling moments, You might be looking for classes that you can take either online or at a community center or at a college that will increase your value so that the next person you go work for sees you as an increased entity. You might be doing volunteer work in the community that gives back. So all of these are things where you can actually feed your soul. So you're not feeling like you're unemployed. And that's where language comes in. You know, I think you and I have talked about this extensively, where language matters. Yeah. So that's where my head is with gig work. I think it's crucial that we are aware that it's a distinct possibility. I'm hoping that it isn't. I don't think so, but that's why it was so important to me to actually have that message. And that's what I started doing and going on the road, talking about how the future of work was going to dramatically change the way we view ourselves. For instance, another key thing is continuing ed, right? In the past, we'd always imagined that our corporations would send us to classes, send us to conferences, send us for further education. Now they're putting a lot of that on us. So it's changing all the dynamics around all these components that we've taken for granted. I've spoken a lot. I haven't let you in yet.
No, I mean, that's great. There's a lot of talking points there. The one thing that I want to expand upon is something you just recently mentioned, and that is how we see ourselves. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I was doing a talk yesterday, and I had an exercise with the group, and we were doing the 5 whys, but we were doing that with triggers. You know, why is that a trigger for you? And what all of us came to realize after going down the whys was that it had to do with our self-worth. All of our triggers were based on our self-worth, because if we truly valued ourselves, then we wouldn't be triggered by certain things. Like if we feel disrespected by someone, if we respect ourselves, then we're not going to take that to heart. Yeah. It's not going to be a trigger. And so when we think about, you know, gig work, and when we're in those times of growth and development for ourselves in between jobs, how we feel during those times is a reflection on how we feel about ourselves and our worth and what we feel like we bring to the table. Right. And we don't like that discomfort. So we either dismiss it, or we let it just we drowned in it. Instead of saying, okay, if I have these concerns, then I need to say, how can I alleviate those concerns by adding value to myself, by feeling more confident? But how do I do it genuinely? Instead of just saying, well, I feel more confident, you know? Right. How do we genuinely believe that? And I think that does tie back into that emotional intelligence piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. And another reason that I think, and not to push it on parents, but I have this phrase, and I think I use it in the book as well, but I've been using it for many years. It's the voice we hear in our ear when we're 15 echoes in our head when we're 50. And long story about it. Basically, I was sitting in my office trying to go on camera one day. My hair was not doing what it was supposed to do. And 7 takes and nothing, you know, it's like the words were perfect, but the way I looked did not, you know, I felt like I wasn't living up to the way I should look. And when I analyzed it afterwards, I realized it's because I could hear my mom saying, "You're going on camera looking like that?" It's like, you know, go get a comb. And yeah, I'd combed my hair 15 times. It didn't do anything that day. And that's when I kind of coined that phrase. And I actually made the video after that, literally about that. It was like, you know, I could hear my mom's voice. She's sitting in England. I'm sitting in Canada. It's not like we're next door to each other. Right. And when I remember telling my sister about this, and she goes, "You're so right." She says, "You know, I never listened to mom and dad when they said, oh, make sure that you hang your clothes up when you come back from work." She says, "But the minute I got my own house, they were nowhere around. And I walk in the door and I take my clothes and I hang them up." And I'm like, it's so we are incredibly influential as parents. And the thing is, that is why I thought it was so important to send this message out, is that the things that we say, hoping to influence our children when they're young, anywhere from like 4, you know, to the age of whenever they leave home, we might not think they're listening, but they are. And that was my worry. it's like that thing that you don't even know you're thinking that influences the way you feel about yourself. And that's why I was very concerned about the 50-year-old, right? I'm concerned about the things where the parent is no longer even probably, passed away or something, and yet you're feeling their influence. And if the job market has changed so significantly and you're working to the person that you were supposed to be when you're 6, you can understand the disjoint, you can understand the disconnect. And you'll never figure out why unless you go to, hopefully go to a therapist or someone and you're talking it out. When you're talking it out, you might figure it out. But if you don't, you're working to a sense of self that isn't true. So it's just an awareness thing that I was trying to highlight.
Yeah, awareness. That's it. That's the key component is awareness. And even though we do hear that voice from younger, I just want to stress that it is, we can change that, right?
Absolutely.
It just you have to have that awareness. Else you're just going to keep running these scripts at your subconscious level. So, and I can't recall whether we spoke about this on our previous podcast, but if not, we'll reiterate it. But with parents, that have kids that are getting ready to go into college, or are maybe sophomores, juniors in high school, and their kids like, yeah, I really don't want to go to college. But the parent has spent this whole time saving for their college and trying to guide them in a certain direction. What conversations do you think need to be had with that child to kind of help guide them? Because again, when you're that young, you may think you know the direction you want to go, but you may be ignorant to what it takes to get there. But yet you still want to guide your child to follow their passion, but in a very thoughtful way. So how would you recommend parents doing that?
So it's very interesting because I often feel like more and more we're putting pressure on kids who are like 14 to 18 years old to make a decision for the rest of their lives. And, we all know, you talk about this all the time, the prefrontal cortex, right? It's not developed until you're 25. And yet we're asking these young people to make decisions on whether they want to do nanotechnology or biomed or, become a poet. And we've got that countering the fact that this person is most likely to live to the age of 100. That tends like 80 plus, like 80 used to be your expected lifespan, and that is more and more clearly going to be 100. So when you think about the amount of life this person has to live and the changes that are coming for them, I think that we have a better opportunity as parents to teach them how to learn, to teach them what to look out for. So just the same way, you start off kindergarten by encouraging them to understand their numbers and their letters, which are the Lego blocks, the building blocks of what is going to help them further on in life. I think it's crucial that at this age now that I'll say 12 to 18-year-olds, you're teaching them how to start finding ways to learn, ways to discover what thrills them, what I won't say passion in a way that is only something that you like, the passion that you feel impelled to act on. I think that's probably a better phrase. So, for instance, I recommend that parents talk about, the UN Sustainability Goals, for example, because each of those is a huge problem the world is facing that we know is not going to be solved in the next 5 years, right? So it becomes something that you can actually make a career out of. If you feel strongly enough that animals should not be hurt, then there is a project out there that can call to you. If you feel strongly enough that people should be educated, then there's a project that's calling to you. If you feel strongly enough that, we need equality in sports, that's a project calling to you. Right. So you've got a whole bunch of opportunities out there. And if parents they can use the UN Sustainability Goals as guides. Once you're getting into education, it is about learning how to learn, not being told what to learn. So we're moving away from take that back. The way in the next 20 years is very clearly a balancing act between EQ and IQ. We cannot do without the IQ.
Right.
But the IQ is now freely available. Anything that has been documented over thousands of years is now available on the internet, if you know how to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the curiosity skills. It's about the complex problem-solving skills. And these are all documented EQ skills, right? So it's learning how to go about addressing a project. It's learning how to manage a project, how to get a deliverable out there. These are the things that you're sending your kid to school for. So, my husband and I have these conversations all the time. It's like, do you have to go for an engineering degree, or can you learn the same thing from studying music or art or poetry? Jury's still out. I think that if you're going to learn how to learn, your interests will then guide you. So I think all power to sending your kid for the best possible, positioning them to stretch themselves so that they go in for a degree that they know they're going to grow within. But then after they get in, being open to the idea that they might be exposed to other topics that will call to them deeply. So each of my 3 kids has gone into university with one intent, and I'm watching them swivel. 2 of them have graduated, and neither of them graduated doing what I thought they were going to do when they walked into university. So I've learned my lesson. But it's because they were exposed to different people. It's the diversity of cultures, of thought, of professors, of learning, of projects. That is what expanded their mind. And that you can get, I won't say you can pretty much get that anywhere if you are open-minded enough. And so for a parent who's helping their young child position themselves, these are 2 or 3 things that I think about. For a start, don't only go for the named universities, the elite universities. You can go for them if they are a match for your child. It's much more important to go where you think you belong than to go where just because that's the name of the university.
Right. Yeah.
Right. If you are, my son did this wonderfully. I think, I don't know if we've actually mentioned this in the book, but my book talked about us doing a trip around the world. And part of that was I homeschooled the kids for a year. My oldest child and it was like knocking heads every single day. He was only in 3rd grade. I'm like, as a parent who, I should be able to teach 3rd grade math and 3rd grade grammar, right? These are not brain science. If you can't teach multiplication and addition,
right?
I'd have a bigger problem, especially being a math grad. So I thought, no brainer. I'll be able to teach my kid. What I didn't factor in is his learning style. His sister, I'd set her task. She'd sit down, she'd do it, and off she'd be playing. Whilst my son was still complaining about the fact that he was being assigned work. So when we came back,
I'd be your son, 100%.
So we came back and I started investigating why this was. And I came upon this idea of learning types. And it turns out my son is a peer learner. He learns from absorbing stuff from people around him. And, that of itself was a really interesting piece of information. Nothing much you can do with it when you're in high school. But when he was searching out for his universities, he had a choice of a couple of really great universities. And he ended up choosing the one where he would be stretched. And I kept saying to him, you're taking on debt going here. You have an option here where you've got a really good scholarship. You're turning that one down. And he said, there I would be at the top of the group. And yes, I'd learn, but here I know I'd have to stretch. So it was really interesting to see how he took that piece of information and worked with it. So I think that's what you want for your children. You want your children to be able to see that hunger, that appetite, that opportunity for themselves. And then what they do with it is different, right? So that's one thing. The other thing I've noticed a lot is projects where parents will shove their kids into university. I'm going to use that phrase very consciously. They'll push their kids into a particular course at a particular university because they have the data to say this is how you're going to succeed. But it isn't the home for that child.
Right.
And it'll then drag not into a 4-year degree, but maybe a 6-year degree because this kid is not quite settled or trying to discover themselves.
Right.
So you begin to see that even though you thought it was the right answer, you will actually waste time in the long run. You'll waste money in the long run depending on who's funding it, whether it's the child themselves or the student themselves or the parents as well. The other one is where, I've seen doctors who've graduated and then set back because this is not who they are. They did it because they were told to do that. But they could not, they couldn't.
They didn't know how to tell their parents or have that conversation with them. They didn't want to let them down. But once they got into the real world, it's like, okay, I'm on my own now.
Yes.
They've paid for everything, and now I get to make the choice.
Trace.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of interject there.
Please.
Because you're bringing up some things that's triggering past conversations that I've had with other people. And it's really sad, when we talk about this parenting pressure, and parents don't do that, out of malice.
No.
They think that they want the best for their kid. They think they're doing the right thing. But as you were saying, these kids spend all this time studying a topic that doesn't interest them, only to find, hey, this isn't what I want. Same with my parents. I wanted to go to school for psychology. And my dad said, no, you're not going for psychology. You have to get your master's, really a doctorate, to make any money doing that. You can't do anything with a bachelor's in psychology, so you're not going for psychology. So I settled for education, which, the irony there is teachers don't make nothing, at least in the U.S. Teachers make like $35,000. You could get that, and not have a degree and make $35,000. But he was cool with that because there was stability. And that was ironic too, because shortly after I started in that major, they started laying teachers off. Point being, my parents did the same thing with me, but it's sad because I was just having a conversation with someone. I was writing a letter of recommendation for a girl that's going into college, and I didn't really know her. It was more of a sorority thing, and I wanted to have a conversation with her before I wrote this letter. So I asked her, what are you going for? She said, marketing. I said, oh, really? So what made you want to get into marketing? Well, my dad's in sales, and, I see what he does with his business, and he's successful. So yeah, I think I'm just going to go into marketing. And I just couldn't help but think that the parent had some influence on that decision, because she didn't have a good reason other than, I see my dad in sales and in business, and I'm going to do that. And so then I asked her a question. I said, so if money, education, resources wasn't an issue, if everybody made the exact same thing when they left college, everybody had the same salary, what makes your heart sing? What would you do with your life? What are you passionate about? And she goes, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. And it was so sad for me to hear that, because why are we reaching that point in our lives? Granted, that doesn't mean that what you're interested in at that point in your life won't change. I'm sure it can and will. But the fact that we're clueless to what we're passionate about, because it's been suppressed and we've been detoured and navigated in different directions away from what we really care about. And I think that's something that parents should pick up on earlier in life. When your kid is playing, don't just see it as playing. Start to notice what they're really good at naturally, what they gravitate towards, what they're interested in. Give them more of that. Let them dabble in things. Send them to camps that focus on their interests. And, allow them to explore, right? Why do you think parents are afraid to do that? What is the fear there? Or is it more just doing what was done for them as well?
That might be part of it, but I think that right now, so I wear a couple of hats, right? Mainly parent. I've been through a couple of recessions, and as a parent who raises a family through a recession, it can change the way you view the world. So what you're looking for your kid is security, right? Because with money, theoretically, you have more choices on happiness, right? I'm not saying that you need money for happiness. That's the reason we took our kids around the world, to show them that that was not true. And they saw for a fact that you can have like a little rubber ball,
The
and
essentials.
yeah,
The essentials.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you can be laughing and happy and enjoy
Mhm.
yourself. So but as a parent, I think you tend to gear your kid towards the things that are purely joy. I think also right now we have a slightly different view on how we raise our kids. Now, this comes totally out of currently reading Hunt Gather Parent as a book. But I think kids who are always being kept busy, right? So like you're always finding an activity for them to keep them amused, don't have the skill set to be able to figure out what makes them happy themselves. If someone's always been doing the thinking for them, oh,
Right.
now we're going to go to camp, now we're going to go to soccer, now we're going to, but they're not engaged in the house. They're not, like, what would you like to cook for dinner? Or, could you make this for your brother? Like when you start having those kinds of conversations, you begin to discover things about yourself and participate in life generally. And I think that's when you start beginning to understand your own passions. So that might be one part of it. Like I said, the other part of it might just be parents trying to gear their kids towards the things that are more successful, given how many really challenging events we've had in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So I look at it like, the 2001 crisis, and then 2008 crisis, and now COVID. It's like, these things do come around cyclically. And yes, we can argue that they come around cyclically, but if you've been through more of them, then you're a little bit more risk averse as a parent. So that might be one reason why they do that.
Well, you mentioned the term secure, and you referenced it in the point of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Security when it comes to finances. And again, there's irony everywhere in our society, but the irony is, while we may be financially secure, we're not personally secure.
Exactly.
And we see where that's gotten us, right? And, my parents saved money, invested money. They're well off. And I would say that they're pretty happy now. But my thing is, like, for me personally, I think parents need to ask what's important to their kids. You can be financially secure, but very discontent. Or you could be living in a very small house, or maybe even, a lot of millennials and younger generations are going more of the minimalist lifestyle, where they're living in vans and working from different places, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you can follow your passion, but you may not make a lot of money, but you're going to be content, and you're going to be happy, and you're going to be joyful. Or you can work really hard and be able to have more things,
but you're always going to be working for them.
But you're always going to be working for it.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be kind of that, I was told one time, and I think Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this too. It doesn't matter what your passion is or what career you choose. You could be obsessed with gnomes for all you care, right? And there's a way to make money. That's a niche market.
Yeah.
But if somebody says, I want to make gnomes and sell handcrafted gnomes, the parent's going to be like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like, who's going to buy that? Somebody's going to buy that. It's more about your drive to find a way to reach that market.
Yes.
I think you could sell and do anything.
Yeah.
And make money doing it.
And the other side is also, it doesn't have to be through selling. It doesn't have to be money related, right? If you understand that what you do gives you value, it feeds your soul. That in itself is part of what we're striving for. I think many parents would rather their kids be happy than wealthy, right? So long as they know that their child is secure in that conversation with themselves.
Right.
So I agree with you. And it does also talk to how the economy is changing. When we talk about the future of work and the shape of work, this is all tied in. When a lot of what I talk about is talking about how this technology change is a trigger for a bigger sociological change. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but It's kind of like the difference between the industrial era and the agricultural era. So we are at that kind of a level of change that's coming. So the criteria on which we're judging our kids or planning for our kids may not be true 15 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. They might be operating, like you said, on a very different economic basis. They might choose to be living in small spaces, traveling all over the world. That's only happened in the past 20 years. That only came about because someone created this thing called the internet, right? So, or actually the World Wide Web. Because before that, you didn't have that luxury. So what the parent grew up with in terms of parameters and constraints is very different from what exists for this young person and what will exist for their children. Right. So that is something I think having that openness, that willingness to explore is much more crucial. I do personally think that education is important. I mean, I'm the daughter of a school principal, so it's been drummed into me, I guess. But there are huge advantages to having an education behind you, mainly because it helps you think better. Now, you can possibly get that without having tools, structures, triggers, prompts around you in the way of professors and groups of people who make you think better. And I think we're seeing more and more of that online nowadays. There are greater communities that exist that make you feel that way. But at present, it is significantly within a higher education space. So I was very surprised. It was 2 years ago, I think I was listening to, I may get this wrong, so don't quote me on this. It was the dean, or whoever's the top of the university. And it was one of the
dean. Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the Texan
or
universities.
Chancellor?
Possibly a chancellor. And it was she was the head of one of the Texan universities. I don't recall the name, so I'm not going to quote it. At that point, I was thinking, why going back to that whole conversation of gig work, if I'm coming in with a degree into your organization and you're only holding me for 6 months or a year of my time, are you paying me enough to pay me back for my investment in my education? So I look at it as a return on investment.
Right.
And if not, then why are we asking kids to do these degrees? Why is my barrier of entry a degree? And what she said is that the corporations are asking the universities to stay open because in those 4 years, they learn EQ skills that the corporations don't want to take on the burden of having to pass along to their employees.
Universities are teaching EQ?
Because the whole idea of how you learn teamwork, how you learn presentations, how you learn to time manage, all come out of this. So when you have someone come in and they already have these skills, they are profitable faster.
Okay.
And I'd heard a similar conversation when I'd listened to someone from Accenture here in Canada talk about why he preferred people from one university versus the other. I remember him saying, oh yeah, that's a really good university and a good degree, because when I bring in people from that degree, I can put them in front of a client within 6 weeks. The university's done such a good job of giving them the extracurriculars and the opportunities to develop themselves. But with this other university, which is also like they considered quite comparable here, in both elite universities, he says it's 9 months to a year and a half before I can put that person in front of a client. So it was very telling that, corporations are looking at how much can they get out of you once they brought you on board. And they're looking to the universities to stay. And that, because that was a confusion to me. I'm like, I couldn't figure out, given the way things were going, what the place was for universities.
Right.
So I see this as that might be one of the answers, because
That's very
it's a lot
interesting.
of debt to take on.
That's interesting, just because, I know a lot of people that have went through university that are not even close to being emotionally intelligent. I can definitely see that it helps with time management.
Yes.
And prioritization and responsibility. I can't say that I agree with the EQ thing unless it's a specific university.
So I think maybe the difference for us who know better in terms of language, it's the difference between what others would have called the soft skills and real EQ.
Yeah. And that's where I guess I have like a bit of an issue with people saying, oh, we're teaching emotional intelligence. It's like, ugh.
No.
You're teaching people how to interact with people and be polite.
Yeah.
You're teaching people more scripts. It's scripts in and of itself. You're not teaching people how to embody it. And that's where I want, if you're listening and if you've heard of emotional intelligence, because so many people, especially in the corporate world, when they hear emotional intelligence, they think of surface level skills, how to engage, how to be cordial, things like that. But they're just so much more. They're missing the mark. They're
absolutely. Really, it's so much more. And I think you're absolutely right there. It's like it requires us. The other thing that came to mind is the fact that an organization will jump on the bandwagon. Mm-hmm. So right now, green sustainability is one of the buzzwords. EQ skills is another one of the buzzwords, mm-hmm. and you'll see them peppered across job applications. Mm-hmm. You'll see them peppered across corporate websites, only because it's part of the conversation right now.
Exactly. They just like multitasking. Remember when that was, I'm Absolutely. A multitasker. I'm good at multitasking.
Yeah. So just beware, do your homework. If someone says, they very strongly embody EQ skills, start searching around LinkedIn, see if the comments by employees sustain their claim. Mm-hmm. If they are supportive in the way that they mention, you'll see it. You'll see it in the commentary back and forth.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And there are, just like all things in life, there are tiers, right? So someone can pay lip service, or they can actually mm-hmm. walk the walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Wow, can you believe it's been another hour?
No.
Yes. I'm
Sorry,
telling you.
I dominated.
No. I love it. And this is why we did 2 parts. Because whenever you and I have a conversation, we just keep going and going and going, because there's so much to it. I think we could do another 5 parts on this.
Maybe we'll do that. Maybe on my podcast. I'll have you come in and chat up the conversation on EQ. Because I got a chance to listen to that Amy Water, Your Brilliance
She's wonderful.
video.
Wonderful. Yes.
And there's so many other spots where you just shine through. And it is, what I love about it is your passion for encouraging people of all ages, but your drive towards, you and I share this drive towards helping parents mm-hmm. target/focus on this as a key skill for their kids, because I think it's so much more persistent than all the IQ advice that is out there.
Yeah. With the crisis that we're in today, with everybody just on edge.
Yeah.
You have to have some form of emotional intelligence if you want to survive and have a somewhat fulfilling life.
Yeah.
You have to. It's just... Yeah. So, but I'm going to put the link to all your resources, including your book, in the description of this video as well. It was in the last one, but for those of you who may just be listening to this for the first time, please go back and check out the previous episode where we started with Karena. We talked a little bit more about her book, Courageous Parenting, and I can't remember the subtitle. Fill me in.
Tilting Towards Better Decisions.
There we go.
Yeah.
So, and I'll put the link to your website as well. But thank you so much, for this wonderfful follow-up.
Nicole.
It is
I always say
a
the
pleasure. Hey, I'm fine with either. Honestly, Brittney-Nichole, I go by that just because there's so many Brittneys out there. It kind of sets me apart a little bit, but Brittney is totally fine.
No, Brittney-Nichole, it is. That's the name you've been given. You should be proud of it.
Well, thank you. Well, it has been a pleasure. Is there anything you would like to end with? Like one final note for any parents or anyone that's not a parent that may be listening who's trying to decide what they want to do with their career?
Okay. I got tons, but I'll do a very quick one. I think for parents, it's trusting that you love your child mm-hmm. and always holding that tension between trusting and knowing what you know is right. Just being able to delve a little bit below telling your child what to do, mm-hmm. but giving them, so not doing that, but instead giving them the material, the tools, the reasons why you're recommending something, but then being good with the decision that they make. Happens in my life all the time. I've got 3 kids, And at first I was be upset that they, like I was talking about my oldest son, did not make the decision that I thought they should make. But in each case, it's been the right decision for them. So I'm now prouder that they don't listen to me, but I feel like I've taught them how to make decisions, how to think. And I think that is crucial. And for that, you have to trust yourself. Mm-hmm. So it starts with you. And if you have that confidence within yourself that you know what, that you're doing the right thing for your child, you will find it okay to be able to accept that they are their own person, and they will be able to make a good space for themselves. No one gets it right 100% of the time, right? So we got to be good with that. And that's part of what life is.
Yeah.
And for everybody else out there, we're coming into a really interesting time. I could say difficult, but I'm choosing not to. Just as many other stages in time and life, this is a bigger moment than a lot of others. But we're going to make it through, and we're going to make it through because there are a lot of good people out there who think good things and actually have other, care about society as a whole. So there's opportunity in everything around us. So just watch out for that. When you think things are dim, do take the time to take a deep breath and look up, and you'll find that there's some opportunity out there for you. So it's going to be good stuff.
That's great. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think some people want to retreat in that darkness instead of getting curious to see what's poking out at the other side, and all the possibilities and opportunities. It's really a great time for us to think, because we've gone numb to that. We've gone numb to thinking. We start coasting when things are great, and we go through life mindlessly. And so this is making us become more mindful. So,
yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Karena. It has been a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure too. Thank you so much for having me.